Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all the listeners wherever in the world you are, and welcome to this program. Tonight, we're going to talk about an article that appeared some time back, an interview of Tendai Biti, where he was admitting that it is foolish to keep participating in elections. And to help us with the discussion tonight, we're going to have Benjamin and Godfrey. So, welcome, gentlemen. The article is very clear. Tendai Biti there does not mince his words. He makes it very clear that it is foolish to keep participating in elections that you know are flawed, and there's absolutely no chance of a free, fair, and meaningful election. Gentlemen, you have had a chance to read the article, I take it, both of you. Godfrey?
Oh, yes.
Yes, I've read the article through. Yes, I have.
So, do you want to give a go at it?
All right. You have said he basically foolish to participate in an election or in an exercise where you already know that there's no way that you can win because of the faults that are within that system. He he was asked, isn't it putting the party's future at risk? Yeah, these elections, the solution, and is the party's future at risk? That's when he goes on to say, really, to participate, and that participation will give the sitting president legitimacy, or the process itself legitimized by participation from all corners of all. So this is what we have been exchanging backwards and forwards, and people wondering whether boycott is a solution or is a way forward. But also participation it does not under the present circumstances. He basically agrees with the participation, but of course he goes on to say, what else can you do? I think later on he quotes that a majority in government, and there's no other way out. You don't participate, they just continue on doing whatever they want to do because of their ability. So basically, he agrees with what we have been trading backwards and forwards. In fact, he shed some light in their minds, and we now know that they are well aware of the foolishness of. We at some point were not sure whether they really grasp the consequences of participation. A flawed system. So that's where we are. Most of us. That's That's it.
Okay, thanks so much, Godfrey. Benjamin, do you want to have your say before we open it for detailed discussion?
thank you very much, Mr. Mkori. Good evening, viewers. Uh, well, I did manage to go through the article, and I wouldn't want to comment mainly about the participation, but I want to comment the subject that the about the people, what we subject the voters to, basically, because it actually shows that both the opposition actually know what the the ordinary people in Zimbabwe goes through when we subject them to a flawed process. Because basically, he himself, actually, Tendai Biti, says that the process is flawed, and we actually know that we are kind of persuading and sometimes even forcing people through a process that only benefits a few minority, right? And looking at that, I would like to dwell more on that as we go on through our discussion. That's what I got to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. Well, to go back to the discussion, I think we can take one item at a time. Um, I think in this particular case, that article actually, just to remind the listeners that it was uh, an article, an interview in 2015. This is after 2 years after the 2013 elections, in which MDC had participated. And also, just as additional background to it, in the article, it starts with the journalist asking Tendai Biti why the opposition were not participating in the by-elections that had resulted as a result of Tendai Biti and others actually being recalled by Morgan Trangirai because they had broken away to form their own party. And this has recurred again and again since then, this recall because you form another party. So there was a parliamentary by-election, and Zanu PF was participating in those by-elections. And the argument really was, why was the opposition not participating? And this is what Tendai Biti was trying to address. And the point there is he appreciated that the electoral process is so flawed. He says there Mugabe had perfected the vote rigging to the point where you are not going to win those elections. Zanu PF will always come out with a clear majority in the elections, which is what had happened in 2018. And these by-elections, Zanu PF will only add to their supermajority. So participating is utterly pointless. The question then we have got to answer is, has the situation changed since then? I don't know whether any one of you guys want to say anything there. Has the situation changed? Are the
This
elections
situation,
fair and credible now than they were in
this
2018, for instance?
the situation hasn't changed at all. It's exactly the same. It's exactly the there has been no change in the process. They've been plugged at all. The voters' roll, which was the main area of contention, is still the same. We have not had amendments to it or correction of the errors that are said to be. in the voters' roll. The situation is still the same.
But I would.
Maybe as a follow up to that one is maybe we need to agree with the only way it's going to change by having reforms, isn't it?
Oh yes. So
Yes.
I would like to add that in the situation has changed because they've actually perfected the art of vote reading. So it's getting worse instead of saying it hasn't changed. It's getting worse because every time new methods or new operations are coming into the process of coming to actually get to to actually the elections, right? Leading to the elections, things are actually changing. The wheels are being turned to actually tighten the vote rigging vehicle, or if I may say.
Yeah, I do agree with you because even in the last election, the experience they went through in the last election would have probably the weakness in their rigging machine, which now I'm sure they've worked hard to plug those. So it has got even tighter and worse, the rigging.
Well, I've got to agree with that. In fact, one of the reasons why it has got worse is clear to see. If the economy is getting worse and worse, and Zanu PF knows which is the economy is getting worse and worse, the electorate are getting more and more restless and desperate to have meaningful change. If Zanu PF is going to retain power, they have no choice but to resort to uh, perfecting, as Benjamin was saying, they're perfecting their vote rigging machine so that they retain power at all costs. So I totally agree. The system has got progressively worse and not better at all. Then this brings us to the next point. Why is Tendai Biti and his colleagues still participating in these elections then?
One wonders why, mindful of all that, as she puts it, why they would convince themselves that it's worthwhile giving it a try. I think probably last time they took advantage of a loophole which they discovered, uh, found that they would Zanu Iran for their money. Now maybe they are relying on whatever loophole they've something in their minds for them to go against BT. Say it the last time around.
What loopholes are you talking
Otherwise,
about?
we don't know. It doesn't make sense at all.
What loophole do you think they had?
Then, I think they paid attention to coding. I think more to the gathering of votes. That's why they had their own tabulation, which in the end they compared and found that they still figures were not agreeing with what Zanu had.
Well, you're now talking of the 2018 elections, but I'll argue on that point, Godfrey, and say to you, well, even before we get to 2018 elections, the opposition, in this case MDC, had participated in the GNU, that's the 2008 to 2013 Global Political Agreement. During that time, they had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms. Why did they fail to implement any reforms?
I think somewhere within that article, that's where he was saying they had super majority, were outnumbered. Any suggestion they would put forward that would be against or that would disadvantage ZANU, they would be outvoted.
Now, I think
I think this
in the article, the bit you are referring to, Godfrey, is actually where he was asked why is MDC not participating in the by-elections that they were talking about here, and he was saying, well, Zanu PF has already got super majority as a result of the 2013 elections, and this by-election will only add more to their super majority already. But during the GNU, actually MDC, the two MDCs had more members of parliament than Zanu PF. They had more cabinet members than Zanu PF. So
I
it
think
wasn't a question of the supermajority. And implementing democratic reforms during the GNU did not depend on majority. Even if you had been there as an independent in the GNU, you could have tabled democratic reforms in parliament. There was nothing to stop you as a member of parliament to submit your reform proposal.
I think that the biggest challenge that Triple C, or let me say MDCT, then faced, and they are still facing now as the new Triple C, is that they they have foolish schemes. Hence, they are always participating in these elections, right? They think they can outsmart. They are trying to always outsmart Zanu PF in rigging the election. Right now, they have a scheme that they have, or they say they have a plan, of which they promised us a plan before then, which was in 2018. And 2013, there was another plan, and the list just goes on. So it's always schemes that do not hold water or do not hold substance, because we must take into consideration that they are not the only ones that are scheming. Zanu is also doing the scheming, and probably they are. Zanu's got inside people within the Triple C that will actually tell them the scheme before the scheme has been implemented. So basically, it's trying to out cheat or outsmart a process that these guys have actually perfected, like we are saying, that they're always, it's called continuous improvement, innovation, to try and consolidate as much power and as much to themselves, that it's getting stronger every day. And these schemes are always getting outdated before we get to the actual date. And unfortunately, because there is also an element of greed, I mean, most of the people that are within the Triple C, they also want to be MPs. Hence, they will force the the leadership to say, well, you want to be president. How come you are saying let us not do, let us boycott by elections for the MPs when you are not boycotting the elections for the presidential, which is the point. So basically, it's, I think there is an element of greed and foolishness at the same time.
Yeah,
Well,
maybe for the benefit
I
and
think on that point, before you go on, Benjo, on that point, that is exactly what Godfrey was saying earlier on. Then I said to you, well, MDC, when they were in the GNU, failed to implement the democratic reforms. That had nothing to do with uh, the elections. Maybe that is the point where you've got to agree on why did they do that, because that will also explain why they keep on participating in flawed elections.
Okay.
So
mm,
So
before you jump to the elections, I would say, okay, deal with the GNU then. Why did they fail to implement reforms?
okay. So I've always said that when it comes to reform, I don't think that voice has ever been that loud. And I think Tendai Biti has actually also talked about it, that even boycotting elections when the by-elections was not enough, was not even sufficient, because they did not talk about why they were boycotting. What was the reason for the actual boycott, which was because there was no reforms, right? So when they got into the GNU, that voice, because they had gotten, like you had said, they'd gotten the majority. They had, in parliament. They had, right. You're looking at a process where they think they've beaten the system, right? Like I've said, they've got schemes. So they scheme, they've beaten the system, and there is no longer need for reforms. Just like now, right? They have a scheme that they can out the more the voters, or the more the votes, right, will guarantee them a victory, or a landslide victory, which is not the case. So that voice to actually say, let us let us stop this nonsense, and let's let's look at the reform issue, has never gotten that attention. They do talk about it when they lose. Let me say, when things don't happen according to them, then they say the whole process is rigged. We need reforms. But when things are sort of like going for them, and they have the majority, like we said during the GNU, they're the majority. There was nothing wrong. There's no need for reform. So when it suits them, there is no need for reform. But when things go against them, the reforms are necessary.
But you are tripping
mm,
yourself there. If you are saying if they felt the reforms were necessary, even when after they made the mistake of the participating and doing nothing about reforms, as in 2015 when they realized that participating in these flawed elections is absolutely futile. This was, remember, that interview was in 2015. In fact,
mm,
by the end of that year, 2015, MDCT had changed their position. They were going to participate in the coming 2018, and they were asked, how are you going to participate without reforms? And they said, oh no, we are going to force Zanu PF to implement the reforms before those elections. So you can tell there was a lot of pressure for them to implement. And I think what I believe is the true explanation why they were even now knowing fully well that elections are being rigged. There is no chance, and that if they participate, they will only give ZANU PF legitimacy and so forth. The main reason why they have kept participating is greed, pure and simple. There are people who participate. Tendai Biti was one of them. They participate particularly in the urban centers where they know the opposition will get seats. Zanu PF has also been smart enough to know, but if they want the opposition to participate, for them to get legitimacy, which is what uh, Tendai Biti was acknowledging there. Participating will give Zanu PF legitimacy. They know the reward for participating is you win a few of these, particularly urban seats. And if you win some of those seats, they are content with that. I think that is a fact that we cannot run away from. You know, to try to persuade some of his own colleagues to boycott the elections when they know they've got a chance of winning the urban seats has been near impossible. That is my view.
I think you're right, but for the benefit, maybe it's going back a little bit of Ben. I can quickly, I've just extracted the article here. Read through, and then you can pick the main points. I think he addressed that we are asking ourselves here. It is the interviewer asking him, Biti, boycotting these by-elections, isn't this putting the party's future? Then Tendai Biti says, look, you can't keep on participating in processes that serve to give big benefits to dictators. Robert Mugabe. Mugabe has perfected the art of winning elections. Very foolish for the opposition to continue legitimizing these shams which don't deliver. This country will go through a serious into 2020 caused by Zanu PF, and yet a country where a government doesn't perform. It is encouraged by majority in parliament. It is encouraged by supermajority in parliament. That's arguing. He continues. So you can't injecting Zimbabweans to processes where their hopes get crushed. The electoral process is also flawed. Countries like South Africa and people like Joseph Zuma, Minister of Internal Affairs, are also quiet. He's now and Zuma. And the Internal Affairs, I'm not sure who was minister there. That's Zimbabwean Internal Minister, I'm not sure who it was. So let Mugabe on little victory, which won't put bread on lives of ordinary. But this will help. I think that's the view now. But this will, no, he continues. But this will help Zanu PF majority in parliament. Do you think this is a wise decision to boycott the elections? Biti. I think that's the interviewer was asking there. If you don't boycott, Mugabe will get they will increase their majority. So he asked him whether it is a wise decision. And say, Zanu PF is already a super majority in parliament with or with elections. So extra seats won't change the fact that they already have a necessary to change the constitution.
No, I mean that point, Godis, is correct, and that is correct actually on the ground as well. If you participate, remember this is a by-election following the 2013 elections, in which Zanu PF won the majority already, a super majority, as Tendai Biti describes it there. And these by-elections are the few seats that the opposition had won, which had been the by-election had resulted because Changirai had recalled all those Tendai Biti and his colleagues who had broken away. So that part of it, Tendai Biti, is correct. But the point here is not only the by-election, even the coming 2018 elections. What is the point of participating when you know the electoral process is so flawed that Zanu PF will win a clear majority again, which is what they did. So
Mm.
there is Tendai Biti, I think, is acknowledging the problem with the electoral system, and he's saying it is absolutely meaningless to keep on participating, particularly when you know all you are doing here is give Zanu PF legitimacy, because they'll end up with the clear majority. And the only logical explanation why they will still do that is they are after the few seats that Zanu PF is always offering to entice the opposition to participate. Because Zanu PF also needs the opposition to participate to get legitimacy.
Mm.
So this is a trade-off.
Yeah.
And although Tendai Biti is saying we know this process is so flawed, Zanu PF will always win a clear majority. And we also know by participating will give Zanu PF legitimacy. Then the question is, why are you keeping on doing it? But that Tendai Biti is not admitting in this article.
Mm.
He doesn't admit we are participating because we are after the few seats that are on offer as to entice the opposition to participate. He
Yeah.
doesn't
He
admit that.
deals with the reform somewhere there. Then when he was asked that question, he said, your question should be, is the boycott sufficient without?
Yes.
Then he says, of course, the answer to that is that is not sufficient. We ought to have organized proper campaigns, clearly define demands for electoral reforms. He acknowledged there has to be some reforms implemented there.
Yeah, but that is going forward. The question is, if you had the opportunity to implement those reforms during the GNU, why did you implement them?
Yeah, he says and a boycott that doesn't have any delivery because the other party to pay attention or listen to you is pointless. He's saying a boycott cause the or which doesn't make bend or listen to the vote. It's pointless.
No, I think that
So he said,
argument one can understand it if there had not been any GNU before that, because during the GNU it was not up to Zanu PF to implement the reforms; it was up to MDC, and they failed to implement them. Tendai Biti does not address that point. But to come back to that point you're saying there, Godfrey, I would argue that in this case here, if you already know participating in these elections is the electoral process is so flawed, you never win. Number one. Number two, if you participate, you are giving legitimacy to Zanu PF. Surely the question then is, why are you keeping on participating? Particularly when other people have told you, including the SADC, have told you do not participate in these elections because the result is already clear. Zanu PF is rigging this process. And you still ignore that advice and participate. You've got to ask yourself, why are you keeping on participating? Why are you so stubborn in participating? And that answer has got to come out before we can move on.
The main issue why I think they keep participating is because they have these schemes that they can always outsmart. Of course, there is the element that reforms are the biggest issue or the biggest hindrance for us to actually have a proper and genuine election, if we may say, right? So when during the GNU, right, when MDC came in, they had the impression that it's another scheme. that, right, people have been struggling so much, and all of a sudden things have gone back to it looks rosy, if I may say, because I mean people were really, let's say, down and out. There was nothing in the shops. There was everything was at a standstill, and basically they thought they had brought life back into the economy of Zimbabwe, and with that they also thought that would guarantee them a landslide victory, just like the same way they are doing now. They are looking at people suffering as a way of getting into office. That you will persuade people through their suffering that they will know that if we do this tomorrow, we will get there. So they're kind of hoping through their schemes, because I don't I would not want to speak on behalf of Triple C or then MDCT to say why you guys are not for, I mean, for since their existence they have never actually pushed for reforms. Like Tendai Biti says, there's been no clear definition of what reforms or what they want. There's always been that small quiet voice to say, but there is the need, you know, there is the need for reform, but it's not as loud as we will win. Do you understand what I'm saying? So they kind of thought that was enough to get them through the finish line. And unfortunately,
He does.
it did not turn out to be exactly the way they were, because spanners were thrown into the works. And all of a sudden, they were beaten left, right, and center.
He does. Adding on to that, what you are saying, Ben, he does acknowledge they did not do any organized, proper campaigns to clearly define reforms, demands for electoral reforms. When we talk about these reforms, I think they should be talking specific, talk reforms by name. If they said impartial, exact, that is more specific. Let's have voters' roll is specific. If they started doing that, I think they can address some of these. Instead of blanket, let's have reforms without pinpointing exactly reforms. People can then, if they said, let's have new, people around, if they go around talking about such, people understand it better. You go through there and talk about we want reforms. People in the rural areas don't know. But if you tell them that we want reforms at a center, which decision, people will understand it better. So I think it's the way they carry this message of reforms to the audience. If they did with specifics, their campaign will come out clearer and it will gather a bit of
As much as I would want to agree with you there, Godfrey, is I think we should realize that there are limitations to what you can expect my aunt and uncle in the rural backwaters to understand. And to be quite honest, they don't need to understand what reforms are, how they are implemented. If you look at the case in point here, South Africa. South Africa, when Mandela was released, they had to write a new constitution. There was commitment by Mandela and company to make sure they write a democratic constitution, which will deliver on the freedoms and basic human rights that the ordinary person believed in. They did not have to go to the ordinary person to explain to them what each clause in the Constitution is saying. Yes, it will be useful for every citizen to understand that, but it is not imperative. So, in this particular case, the fact that Tendai Biti, somebody of his caliber, understands that Zanu PF has perfected the art of rigging elections, surely you would expect that he also knows that, and in fact, he acknowledges in this article that it is foolish to keep on participating in an electoral process that is so flawed that Zanu PF is guaranteed to win it and come out with the clear majority every time. And that by participating, all you're doing is giving Zanu PF legitimacy. That point was understood. And yet, few months down the line, he still participated. And if we go back to the period before 2015, he was in the GNU. He failed to implement even one meaningful democratic change. So we can't keep on. I think the main problem we've had in Zimbabwe, in my view, is that Zimbabweans have been bending over backwards to try to give an excuse why the opposition have failed to deliver. And that has somehow stopped us making the progress. I mean, here is Tendai Biti admitting himself that, yes, this is futile to keep on participating. And yet, if somebody had followed this interview in 2018 or post 2018, they would have asked him, 3 years ago, you acknowledged that it was futile participating. Why did you participate? That is a relevant question that I think should have been asked and must be asked.
But
because in 2018, they participated.
If you look at it, every time when the opposition has participated in these elections, they have always guaranteed the electorate that they have a plan. They have always come out and said, we have a plan, a bulletproof plan. This is what they've always said to everybody when we are heading towards elections, right? And yet you are right to say the only plan that when they actually come to their senses, because at one point he himself, Tendai Biti, says Zimbabweans must stop putting faith in any individual or individuals or collectively. Simply say we are tired. We are tired of time being wasted by stupid opposition party and stupid ruling party. It's always about stupid schemes, if I may say now, foolish schemes. Instead of, everybody knows that there is need for reforms, and reforms will mean that we'll have to put the gravy seats on hold and start dealing with the real issue. So if I may say, it's you have to get out of office, and by getting out of office, you have to boycott the election, all right, and then try and deal with the reforms. So it's also the element of greed, the element of these foolish schemes that we can outnumber. Like recently, they are saying that come out and vote in big numbers. This is the only way we can beat the ruling party, of which it doesn't make any sense. If you cannot protect a few, if you've got 3 cookies in a jar and somebody takes one, it's easy for you to see that, okay, somebody's taken a cookie from the cookie jar, right? But imagine you've got a whole cookie jar full and somebody takes one. How are you going to see? Do you understand? So it's another foolish scheme. Always there is a scheme that they want just so that they can also participate in the elections and also benefit something. So it's they're trying to balance the scales for they themselves. We must also remember the opposition basically does not really have finances for themselves, whereas the government, the ruling party, gets money from within, right? So there is that element that they also need to eat from there. So to say let's put that on a hold, it's to some it doesn't make sense.
Well, Benjamin, I think I'll address that point personally and say you're absolutely right. They always come up, and you're correct also in saying foolish solutions, which clearly haven't worked because Zanu PF has always successfully rigged the elections anyway. I think those foolish solutions are actually meant to for the gullible and naive electorate. I mean, you talked of the most recent one. We are, people must register to vote in numbers and then go and vote in numbers, and will overwhelm the system. They said that at the beginning, soon after the 2018 elections. But if you look at ZEC's own report in May this year, this is roughly 4 years of Triple C uh, carrying out their mass voter registration campaign. ZEC said only 250,000 Zimbabweans had registered in that period. And Triple C's own target was 6 million. In other words, in 4 years, they've only managed to register 4% of their own target. So that, as a solution, is clearly dead in the water. There's not going to be any mass voter registration and mass voting at the end of the day. And yet, you're right. Some of them still campaign on that basis. Go and mass voter registration. Do you seriously expect in the remaining few months from May to the elections that could be held in March next year, or even if they are going to July, you are going to register the remaining 5 million? The answer is no. Because the whole voter registration itself is part of the vote rigging. ZEC will manipulate the voter registration system to favor Zanu PF, and that's what they've been doing, and that's what they are doing. You know, and this comes back to what Tendai Biti was admitting. Mugabe Zanu PF has perfected the vote rigging scheme. They know it. It's not as if they don't know it. They know it. They also know by participating, they are giving Zanu PF legitimacy. It's not that they don't know it, they know it. And this, by the way, David is not the first one to admit this. David Coltart in his book has admitted exactly the same thing. And yet they still keep on participating. At least David Coltart in his book explains why they keep on participating. He admits is because we are after the few seats that are available. We could not trust MDCT to boycott the elections. And if we boycotted, MDCT does not, they will win those seats that are available. And they, in turn, did not trust MDC Nube to boycott, because if they participated, they will win the few seats that are available. So we are now caught in this situation out of pure greed by the opposition. As long as Zanu PF is offering them a share of the gravy train seats, the opposition will participate no matter what. I think that is the reality that Zimbabweans have got to face up to and deal with, in my view.
And the other
Yeah,
issue,
I think
sorry,
that's why Changrai is quite clever at that when he put all the together, so that if they decide to boycott, they boycott in unity. As MDC Ngube, there was MDC Ngube, MDC T, Zanu managed to put between them. There will be jealousy of each other. I think that was a Zanu move, division, and also uh, one suspecting the other would take the the seats. The argument on
Yeah,
voting in
but
numbers really, I
Godfrey,
think it
before you
yes.
move on from that one, they did have the
Mhm.
coalition in forming the MDC alliance, and yet the issue of boycotting the elections in 2018 was never even raised. So we can't keep on saying it was because they were not united. They were united when they formed the MDC alliance, and they still participated.
the other thing that the opposition face is relevance. They have to keep themselves relevant, whether they lose an election. Like when they lost the 2018 election, the first thing they had to do for Triple C was to remain relevant, right? To make a lot of noise and still be heard. And how do you do that? The only thing you can do that is by preaching false gospel and preaching false hope. If you then go and say, okay, you start taking the back seat and saying, okay, we are no longer going to be participating because we we think the system is flawed. There is fear that they will no longer be relevant in the eyes of the people. So they also face a situation where they themselves have to remain relevant in the eyes of the people and to be always heard that they're doing this, they're doing that, they're doing this. So for them, I think it's also it's quite difficult to say let us boycott and then let's start teaching people reforms. Why we are boycotting? And like you said, a lot of people may not be privileged to understand what the whole system is all about. So
Mm.
it's kind of a delicate issue for they would actually be the ones to actually know why exactly they have not really come forward with the issue. They have mentioned it. I mean, you do hear, from the background that reforms are supposed to be implemented, but they're not spoken out loud.
The other point that I had this argument about voting in numbers or let's have more votes. I think it should be shot down with the example of 73%, which was overwhelming or a landslide, but it was just watered down to nothing. So as long as ZANU ability to choke numbers, uh, votes will not really achieve anything. You are very right that relevance is one of for the deal with. That's between the two. If in this case Monzora wins, that means Misa CCC will be forgotten because it will now be just Monzora. That will be the opposition. Yeah, the only way we can talk about GNU why they didn't do that. I think the main thing that we should is looking forward and say, why are they not talking about it now? In their campaigns, why are they not in first? Whatever happened in GNU, there were so many. I think we should deal with why are they not talking about the reforms if reforms are that for their win? Why are they not addressing that?
Okay, well, I think we've done justice to this article. My concluding remark will be that um, I think we have got the opposition that honestly admits that the process is flawed, but they cannot stop participating because of greed, period. And as long as they've got excuses to justify or to hide behind their greed, and this is addressing the point you were making, Benjamin, there that they will always come up with um, one false statement about how they're going to win the elections and so forth. I think it's just purely because they cannot answer the question, why are you keeping on participating? So they've got to say, oh, we are participating because we still think we are going to win the elections. We've come up with a strategy of winning rigged elections, which is just nonsensical. You know, none of those strategies have worked, and the present one we've already seen it's doomed. It's already failed long before the elections are due. So the main problem here is unless we have got an educated electorate who are prepared to say, wait a minute, we have been going through this process over and over again, and you yourself admitted that the process is so flawed you can't win it. You're only participating out of greed. Until the electorate are smart enough to confront the opposition on that basis, I think we'll find ourselves going through one electoral process uh, after another, getting absolutely nowhere. So I don't know whether Benjamin, you'd want to give your closing remarks there.
Oh yes, thank you. So I would personally just say, sometimes it is good to do the dirty work instead of just coming up with fast schemes where you can just decide, okay, we are going to do this and that, and then this is the way to beat them. Already you know that the system is so flawed, right? The one that is running against you is the one that is counting the numbers. Basically, it's a doomed mission already. So we need to give reforms a voice. It's high time somebody gave reforms a good voice. We should stand up and actually be heard in terms of the reforms, the electoral reforms that we need, so that at least we may actually have a fighting chance for democracy to prevail at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Ms. Nyamgure, your closing remarks, please.
True. We reforms, the campaign reforms a louder voice. But what I fear is, as long as it's between, in this case, and CCC, ZANU not decide not to listen to the voice, like where the voice Zanu can choose not to take you serious. Pay attention to whatever you are saying. It's just between them. But I think what we need is the masses in the call for reforms and probably the international institutions to call for reforms. Then that will force Zanu to pay attention. I think that's but reforms definitely they have to be made.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyamkure. Thank you, Benjamin, and thanks for participating and for your inputs. And to the listeners, thank you very much for listening. And we hope we did say some ideas that will stimulate you. Again, thanks again to everybody, and good night, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, and